Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Sameem.
I'm Shingai.
And I'm Nick.
And welcome back to talking about novellas. I am very excited that Shingai is able to join us for this part of the conversation as someone who has actually published a novella, which is good expertise to have. And I wanted to start out because we ended the last episode with the question of how do you know that what you're, or how or when do you realize that what you're writing is a novella? What's the process of figuring out? Do you know from the beginning this is going to be a novella, or do you discover it along the way? And I wanted to restart with this question because Sameem did not get to answer it on the last one. And then I know as well that both Sameem and Shingai has work that has transitioned either into novella or out of novella. So I'm interested to in your thoughts about how that happened. Like, Sameem, how did you know that your novella was not actually a novella? And Shingai, how did you know that was it a short story at first, should become a novella?
I think I have twice experienced starting to write something as a short story and realizing that I needed more space and decided, oh, this is a novella. And then realized, oh no, this isn't enough space, and moved on to novel. One of those two projects is now probably series. I haven't written all this yet.
Wait a second. So you've done this twice? Short to novella that then has now become a novel?
Yes. One of them has a draft done. One of them is in progress. But I think one of the reasons in my case for this happening was because I think the world building was part of the story in this case. I don't think the world building always has to be part of the story, but for both of these stories, it very much was the case. I needed to broaden the world in order to tell the story that I wanted to tell. And there's probably different ways to tell those stories, but for me, I think a lot of it, the motivation to write those pieces wasn't about the story I wanted to tell, but about the world I wanted to show. And therefore, having that extra space was really important to be able to explain the world and why it exists the way it does.
So I guess the last time we were talking about novellas, whenever these air, we've kind of been talking about how world building needs to be done in a more condensed way often, or what is it about the worlds that you wanted to build that didn't fit in a novella length for you?
I think some of it had to do with, and I mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about Murderbot in the last novella episode, where there's a really good use of very familiar genre tropes. Like, she didn't have to go in and explain what a sec unit is in that much detail, right? Like, we mostly understood what she was getting at. And I think that for some of the stuff that I'm trying to do in both of these works, I don't think I have a lot of those touchstones for some of the concepts that I'm pulling out. I think where I do, I can make use of that. But I don't have a lot of at least like well-known source material that I can reference to explain some of these things, even to myself. So I think part of it is, even at the end of the day, it's possible I could go back and rewrite this as a novella. But I think I first needed to expand the world for myself to be able to understand what it is that the components of the story, of the world that I can use for the story that I want to tell. Does that make sense?
It does, but I kind of also want to ask, is there part of this that is related to the fact that tropes are very Western and often, I mean, we know a lot of like science fiction and fantasy tropes are based in kind of like a white European or Western or US based fantasy or science fiction worlds. Because you've got me thinking about Sui Devi Zokumboa's essay in the collection that Chinelo and Walu put together that I can't remember the name of right now, but I will get there in a second. That is called The Exposition Tax, and about how marginalized authors have to spend more time explaining the assumptions of the places that they're writing about and the peoples that they're writing about, or the histories and the cultures that they're riffing off of in secondary worlds, in ways that people who fit a kind of white Western generic idea of tropes don't have to spend as much time doing. Is there elements of that, or is this more about the worlds themselves being ones that you're designing in new ways? Does this question make sense?
I think it makes sense. I think both are probably true. And some of it is like explaining it to me, right? Like I have an exposition tax to myself. I don't know. I'll try to make that make sense in a second. But it's like I don't have any reference points for the worlds that I'm trying to build sometimes. And therefore, I have to over-explain things to me before I even get the world that I'm in. And that changes the dynamic of the story very quickly when you touch upon something in your world building that's like, oh, I hadn't considered this. And I can't think of any specific examples, but I think a big part of it is one of those novels, the first one, is set probably like 300 or 400 years in the future. And I had to figure out what happened in the 300 years between then and now, in a way that I don't think every future story needs to. But I think there was a lineage of culture and language and people that I haven't seen played out in the way that I need to see play out in other works. That makes it really difficult to build off of.
Shingai, what's the process been for you in moving between lengths, and how did that emerge for you?
When I first wrote And This Is How to Stay Alive, it was a short story, and I was workshopping it in my MFA, and I remember feeling like the story was so much more than what I had been able to pen down. And that was the critique that I got in class. That was the feedback that I got in class, that the story felt like it was meant to be bigger than it was. But I hadn't written more than short story length, because generally I tend to write short. I tend to write with a lot of brevity. So it felt like a challenge. And the first half of the novella I wrote in the course of a couple of months. And then it took me a minute to figure out how else I wanted the story to become. And when it finally clicked, the last half of the novella I wrote in 2 days, which was a crazy, like, what even is my flow? But it worked out. And I think at that point, as much as the story is the type of story that I feel like doesn't have an ending, like there's no way to like end the story, because it's about going back in time over and over again. It felt like it had covered, because I was writing about so much heaviness and so much grief, and I really wanted moments of reprieve and like joy and like sweetness in the midst of all of the heaviness. And I think having a longer manuscript to work with makes it possible to just put across so many different feelings. Yeah,
I hear what you're saying about it not ending in a way of a neat narrative arc that a kind of like linear model of time presupposes, which is what your novella's writing alternatives to. But I feel like it did. So I guess in a sense of like a linear sort of plot, maybe didn't have an ending, but it definitely had an emotional ending. Like it reached a point of saying what it needed to say about grief and about handling grief. So I'm wondering then, it raises for me a question of like different types of endings we could play with in novellas, or perhaps different types of arcs. Because on the last episode, I made a comment that nobody picked up because I was the moderator and then I was moving between people. But I don't know that necessarily everybody feels the same way, because I think I said something about novellas being able to end on the edge of something or on the cusp of something in a way that I don't know would be satisfying in a novel, or that novels can end on a cusp like that, and was particularly referencing The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain, and Lost Ark Dreaming. And then thinking about that in relation to your novella, Shingai, and the way that it ends in the middle of something, but says what it needs to say about grief. And those other novels also said what they needed to say. I don't know. It makes me wonder, do you think that that's unique to novellas or shorter forms? Is it something that would work in a long form? And like, what kinds of arcs might we play with, I guess, in novellas?
Yeah, I feel like it definitely might be easier with shorter forms, with novellas and novelettes, to be able to end on the precipice of something. And that's a really cool observation, because I feel
I
like
have to be clear that was Sameem's observation, not mine.
Okay. Valid. Yeah, because novels, it's like you're asking the reader to do a lot more. So by the time they're getting to an ending, they've earned like an ending that feels, I don't know. I also am one to say that like there are no rules and do whatever the fuck you want. But I do see how you can play around a lot more with a shorter text like a novella and a short story when it comes to the endings than with a novel. Yeah.
So there's something about the weight of investment that means leaving people there after that long of a time wouldn't be satisfying in a novel, perhaps. Nick?
Unless you do it really, really well, I think.
Right, because I mean, there are no rules and do whatever you want.
Exactly.
But do it well if you're going to do it. Nick?
I like what Shingai just said of F all the rules. Because I was just thinking what makes novellas kind of harder, reader expectation and things like that is genre expectations. How much do we rely on long form for genre expectations? If I am in a medieval fantasy setting, I don't have to go into depth on a lot of stuff because there is a certain level of expectation that my reader is going to have. I don't feel like that's the case with novellas or novelettes. I think the reader expectation in a specific genre, I think that shrinks as well. And so you do have to be a little bit more precise in how you do world building there. Unless someone wants to counter me and say I'm a complete idiot, and I'm open to that.
You are always like immediately qualifying the smart things that you say, and you should stop that.
I don't think I'm smart. We've been through this.
But you so obviously prove yourself wrong every episode. Yeah, I'm thinking about that shorthand though too, in relation to the exposition tax, which like I brought up earlier, which is in the book Ex Marginalia, I remembered, which is a fantastic book. But thinking too about like what shorthands are available and what aren't for what people want to do in novellas, as well, is something interesting to put on the table. But Sameem has something to say.
Well, I thought of something new to say.
Say the old thing and the new thing.
I maybe will say both, but I think for the two books that we were talking about, I think like despite those novellas ending on the precipice of something new, they still told a complete story in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. It might have been the story before the story, but it was still a standalone story. And I think they they did something that like did a good balancing of making me feel satisfied and complete that the story that I was trying to tell was done, but that there is more to tell in these characters and this world's stories, in a way that like I don't always leave a book like a full length novel wanting necessarily. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. The old thing I was going to say, though, is I'm having a hard time thinking of a short story I've read that ended that way, that didn't make me feel like, oh, this is that they just chose the wrong story to tell.
What makes it the wrong story?
In that, like, it didn't, and this is purely preference, and I can't think of a specific example off the top of my mind, but I think a novella maybe gives you enough space to tell a complete story and then tell a glimpse of what's coming next. A short story, I don't know if it's as easy to do that. And so I think you might end up in a situation where you've told only the beginning of a story. So again, not a hard, fast rule, but I think it's a lot more challenging in that length.
What about a novelette?
Wait a second. I was also going to say, what about Flash?
That's even harder.
No, I don't know. I'm going back to what LP said about kind of like Flash being to novellas as shorts are to novels. And because when you were saying that, I'm like, I have written at least 2 stories that immediately come to mind that do that end on the cusp of a beginning. But they're Flash stories. And I think that there might be something maybe that works a little bit easier in a Flash story to do that, because they're not meant to be multiple scenes usually. Or if they are multiple scenes, they're very like short, like glimpses into something. But when you're telling a Flash story of like a moment that encapsulates a decision, for instance, or a turning point in somebody's life, I think that those are similarly cuspy in the ways that novellas can be. And also, but this is a personal thing that I'm talking about my own work.
Well, that makes me want to say 2 things. One, that I said it's not easy to do, and clearly you are a very skilled writer, and therefore you've been able to accomplish this. That's the thing that you're trying to sweep under the rug. But now I think I understand maybe LP's analogy in a way that I hadn't processed before. That does make a little bit more sense to me. And I don't know how much of it is format versus reader expectation. But Flash maybe is you're expecting, or Flash, you know that it's going to be short, and therefore you're okay with where it's going to land. And novella, if you're thinking of that as a shorter novel rather than a longer short story, then maybe you're also, from a reader expectation perspective, also okay with where it's landing. But again, there are no rules, and do whatever you want.
I rudely interrupted Shingai's prompting of, what about novelettes?
Is that a question for me? I don't know. I really don't know.
Shingai, what are your thoughts on novelettes?
I'm going to do the same thing you did and said that I wrote one that ended at the precipice of a beginning. So.
Okay, so
like I said before, if you are really skilled and do it well, then you can do anything.
Nick has something to say.
So let me jump in here with the novelettes. And I don't know if I'm going to answer the question. This is a thought. So I have a hard time with short stories that everyone always feels like it's a bigger story that needs to be told. Right? But I'm like, no, I told everything. What do you mean? And usually that means there's 1 or 2 plot holes that were open I'm not seeing that could easily carry on in that short story, where you still have your beginning, middle, end, but then you're filling in the plot holes that drive it to be a novelette. So what the current projects I'm working on, and Will ask me this all the time, so what is it? Is it a novella? Is it a series? Is it a novel? And I'm like, I have no idea right now. I'm literally in a space where I'm letting my character and my story carry me forward, and it's going to end when it ends, and that's where it's at. And then I can go back through and self-analyze and see where the missing plot holes are. I think when it comes to something like that, and I don't typically, I do have like an end goal, right? Where it's like, hey, this is going to be a novel. That does make it harder. Oh, I'm going to make this a novella. That makes it harder. Because if you're used to writing a certain way and you're used to structuring a novel, let's say, but you're trying to write a novella, you have certain inherent habits that you are going to do that you're not practiced with. So for this one, it's kind of like, let's kind of retrain myself a little bit and self-identify throughout the story as I'm writing it, what this story is going to be. So then in turn, I can turn around and say, yeah, I finished this and it is a novella. Yes, I finished it. It is a novel. Because I think from a writer aspect, you are boxing yourself in because you're like, I have to hit this goal. Like, no, it has to be a novella. But at the end of the day, if the story that you're trying to tell is not a novella and it is a novel, let it be a novel.
I'm also wondering, Nick, since you raised that sometimes your shorts, come back with the feedback of like, it needs to be longer because, but there's things that you could spin out, you said, from it. Do you ever choose to pare those things back to keep it as a short story?
Yeah. So and that's more or less what I've done. So obviously, like, I want to write to the short fiction market, right? I have to write a short story. But I do think the planning on that is a little bit different than planning for like a novella or a novel. And it's one of those things, it's the open plot holes at least for me, where, hey, I tugged on a plot line and because it's a short story, it's magnified. In a novel, no one would have caught that. But in a short story, someone caught it and they're interested and they want to know more about it. And it's like, I mentioned something in a backstory for one of my stories, and someone was like, hey, is that one done too? Because I want to know about that. And you're like, what? Like, that's a whole nother project. How did that come up? And it's like, but it's so things that in a novel, that's something I can continue to explore. But that one sentence that helps develop backstory open a plot thread for somebody else and a couple other readers. And I think as you're going through it, like when your work is complete, I think that's when the time needs to go through and look and get the feedback and figure out, hey, what open plot holes do I have? What questions are you people asking that inevitably their request without saying it is they want more of X? Because if they're in a position of your feedback is I want more, then you're obviously not going to have a novella at that point. It's going to bleed into a novel because you're having to add more.
Sameem, when you're talking about shorts that don't feel like they're telling the story that needs to be told, is it similar to what Nick's pointing out, that there's threads left unpulled or like questions left unanswered? Or is it, I don't know, what is it that brings that feeling for you?
I am actually totally fine with questions left unanswered as long as there are questions that are answered.
Oh, and so it's like something not being answered at all.
At all. Or, I mean, actually, I should take that back. This is going to sound really cheesy. I want a good journey. I want a good, like, something that was interesting to read. And I'm totally okay with there's open-ended questions at the end. Doesn't really bother me. I
will say there is a difference between open-ended questions, because I do love that too, but open plots that get unexplored. There is a distinct difference in those.
Part of this, I guess, goes into a question that I thought of after re-listening to the last episode. Part of what we've been talking about is that novellas need to follow through on whatever expectations are set or promises are given. Do you think that there's different expectations that need to be set for novellas, or do you, like, what kinds of expectations, I guess, do you try to set for the reader? when you're writing a novella specifically, are they different than other lengths for you? Or questions, I guess, if that's a better place, or questions to be answered. Are they different sorts of questions, or different sizes of questions, or different textures of questions? I'm going to keep asking until somebody finds one they like to answer.
I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me was pacing. Like that's the one thing that would be different. Like I'm thinking about for short stories, everything is a lot more immediate than with a novella where you have like a little bit more space and time to expand on characters and the worlds around them. But then that doesn't mean that you can take all the time in the world like a novel to sit with the world building, you know? So yeah, like I'm just, if you're trying to constrain the story, which we've also said, maybe don't do, maybe see what it is and then, decide. But if you are trying to constrain the story into a novella, then I think, one of the things to consider is how to get, your characters, like your readers emotionally invested with your characters within the first 20 pages. Yeah.
Sameem?
Yeah, I think that this is a similar point, but I think in addition to pacing, I think layers and depth is another thing you need to consider when you're looking into length. In that, and this isn't like a novella specific thing. This is like no matter if you are constrained by length, you have to consider this. How broad are you going? How deep are you going? So if you're going to focus on one POV and one character and one specific like problem that they're trying to solve through that story, then you can just go really deep on that one. But if you have like multiple voices and it's sort of multiple problems that you're dealing with, like how broad, then you need to go broader. And if you're going broader, you have less time to go deep if it's shorter in length. And so I think figuring that out is definitely like super important. And like I was saying before, I think sometimes you know the length for sure, and therefore you are writing to the length for various reasons. And I think other times it's just keep exploring the world, and then you can go back and decide like what is the length of story that you need in the space that you need to tell that story. Again, caveat, there are no rules. You can break them. Or there are no rules to break. You can do whatever you want. But just see what works for the story that you want to tell and how you want to tell it.
As you all have been writing novellas or moving works into novella form, what are things that have been challenges for you in that process? Like for you, is there something that's specifically challenging or that you wrestled with in writing novellas? We have been joined by LP, who will be getting a question presently, but I'm just not sure he's ready yet.
So, go ahead, LP.
Well, since you called me from the ether, I've been thinking today about promises.
This is what we were just talking about.
Oh, darn. Okay.
No. Yes, you're on time. You're right on time. Go.
Okay. We read an article today. Sameem, did you send that article? No. Jenna, did you send that article? Wait,
was it the Strange Horizons discussion? Yes, I sent it, but I have not listened to it yet.
Oh, okay. Well, in this podcast, it was an article. I read the transcript. That's why I said article. In this podcast, the presenter as well as the guests are talking about how sometimes novellas can miss the mark, books broadly, but novellas specifically can miss the mark because, and I think this is true of any story, where like sometimes there are more promises than there are responses to the promises. And like any can of worms you open up, you have to close by the end in order for people to feel like it's a satisfying ending. So if you open up too many things, and books, novels have the opportunity to open up all the cans. Actually, that's one of the reasons I really love The Sin of Bright Doors, because there's not a dangling plot thread to be found in that entire book. But sometimes when with novellas, they'll have too many promises made, and then when you get to the end, all of them are not addressed. And I was like, oh, that's wild. I haven't thought about that. And now I'm like deep in the weeds around that. So yes.
Yeah, a way that Nick just put it was that you can leave questions unanswered, but you can't leave plot threads dangling. I paraphrased that, but that there's a difference between having unanswered questions and unanswered plot things that were brought up.
For sure. I wholeheartedly agree. I just like the word promises better.
So does anybody have challenges you want to talk about?
I feel like Nick was about to say something.
Yeah, Shingai, what do you have challenges with?
Nick!
So I think for me, I focus way too much on theme. Because generally when I am concentrating on writing a novella, right, there's a very specific theme and message I want to get across. And sometimes other things don't come along with that because I'm focusing too much on that.
Okay, so the theme comes through, but maybe the characters of the world are a little...
No, the plot.
Oh, the plot. Okay.
So I'm character first, but I'm putting my character through a journey to bring about a theme, and then it's like, well, what the hell is the plot? What are we doing here?
But the character had their growth. It's just...
Oh, they had their growth. They had a great journey, but then it's like, why is the city on fire? What happened? And you're like, ooh.
Well, I should maybe answer that one if I put a city on fire.
Yeah, there was a war. Did you not get that?
Shingai?
Yeah, I think one of the things on top of plot and where you find yourself in the story is also characters, like making sure, especially if it's a multi-POV novella, making sure that the characters that you want to come across all have enough space on the page. Because with a novella, again, the length can be such a limitation if you are especially a verbose writer who has like a lot of things to say about everything. Yeah. So like making sure the characters all feel well represented. That was something that I was struggling with for sure.
LP?
Y'all, writing is hard. Oh God. It's dumb and unnecessary, and like we chose it as a thing. I think one of the things that I'm struggling with is scale. Like I know that like most structures scale, all structures scale, but like the rhythm of novellas is really different from the rhythm of short story, and so like I've just kind of had to acknowledge that and like recognize that like there will be some growing pains as I scale to a larger format.
So
than
talk to us.
anything I've ever written.
Talk to us about this distinction, I guess, between scale and rhythm for stories. Like what makes the scale? Because I know you've talked about it here, right? Like that things are scalable. That the same sort of structure you'd use for a shorter work is the same structure you'd use for something else. It just has to scale. And then I wanted to open up that to everybody else and see if you agree. But also, talk to us about scale and rhythm.
I mean, I think about Mary Robinette Kowal's use of the mice quotient. As she says, she uses that for her short stories. She uses it for her novels and everything in between. Shout out to Mary Robinette. What is the name of her book that's about to come out? It's a twofer with Sam Miller.
I should know this. I was just looking it up.
Apprehension. Mary Robinette's is called Apprehension, and Sam Miller's is called Red Star Hustle, coming out from Simon Schuster. It's a twofer. I'm super excited about it. But like, you know, a 3-act structure works in a short story. It works in a novella. It works in a novel. I think that, particularly as a short story writer, I'm trained to get in and get out. And even then, people I love who love me have had to tell me, baby, you are a withholding writer. You've left so much to inference that I don't know what the fuck is happening. And I'm like, touche, that's fair. I love you for being honest with me. But I think I think novels have an opportunity to luxuriate in a way, in prose, in theme, in symbolism, in world building, in character development, in a way that like few other formats do. And so trying to find that middle space between short stories and novellas for me feels challenging. Figuring out how much I can luxuriate, you know, when is it good taste and when is it indulgent? And that's just trial and error. I want to shout out Cat Walter and Bull's No Gods, No Monsters, because the way he luxuriates in language in that book, the way he the way he undergirds theme and symbolism in that book, it's so fucking yummy. And like I aspire, but like I'm not gonna do that in a novella. Like I don't. There's just not the space.
What do y'all think? Do you agree?
No.
Go ahead, Sameem.
I think you could luxuriate. I think it might be a different story and experience than maybe what we see very commonly. And maybe it's a different set of expectations. But like I was saying when LP joined, you can break all the rules. Just have it be a worthwhile experience for yourself and your reader.
Nick?
Shingai, were you going to say something too?
I was, but you can say what you were going to say.
Well, I was just going to bring up, we also have to consider the non-Western story structure too. So not everything has to be written as a Western society and things like that, which again, there's no rules. They're more like guidelines, use it as a tool more than anything. But I think non-Western story structure too should be a factor in consideration in this.
Yeah. I was going to say, LP is making writing novels sound so much more delicious than it feels. Actively writing a novel right now. Luxuriate is not the word that I would use to describe the process. But I hear what you're saying, and it's making me like I should spend more time being grateful about what writing a novel offers instead of complaining about how hard it is, I think.
I started with writing is hard. This is a silly career choice.
Writing is hard. I do think that the novella, the way that you are able to luxuriate is thinking about poetry and like how short that is, but like how delicious it can be. I feel like you can bring that into most lengths.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about luxuriating, LP, and that it's mostly available in this longest form. Because I was like, oh, I find the luxuriating in language often in the shortest form. Like I find the most luxurious language to really be in poetry. And I think like Shingai's saying that's available to use in all forms. So I guess maybe there's different. I also wonder though, because you're talking about luxuriating in terms of rhythm, I believe, and kind of slowing. Well, you kind of brought it up, I think, in the context of rhythm and in a like slowing of a pace. And so I think there's something different maybe to the idea of luxuriating in language as a slow pace act. And luxuriating in language in the like compact form that's less of a rhythm luxuriating and more of a or a different sort of rhythm. Maybe they're both, everything is a rhythm. I'm getting lost. Save me.
There's many ways to rhythm. I think one of the ways that you can luxuriate in a novel more than you can do in a short story or maybe a novelette is the side quest. And like, obviously this isn't like, I'm not speaking in rules. I don't believe in rules. I don't want Sameem to think we're fighting because he disagreed with me off rip. I didn't take it personally. Totally took it personally. I'm gonna cry now. So I think that like the side quests are one thing, but like more than anything, because like I'm not I'm into 2, 3. Okay, I think of concept first. I build a world in my head, and then I think about who would be the most interesting person to tell the story from. Uh, the most interesting person, their perspective would. I can talk. Who would be the most interesting person whose perspective to tell the story from? And then that's when I get the positionality of character, but the specifics of character come from me being in the draft. Okay, so that's that. And then like very quickly like plot points kind of come, but I'm not a structure guy. And like I balk at the idea that like at the 25% mark, the inciting incident should be happening because that's what people expect. And I was like, well, yeah, but what if we write something that people don't expect? Like, I think Lisa Crone's Story Genius says something to the fact that like we're trained to see story in a very specific way in the West, and I'm like, yeah, let's stop training people to, because the thing is like a rhythm can happen in the form of dialogue. It's the reveals that happen. It's the points of intrigue that happen along the way in a story. And as long as those keep coming to pull someone along, the inciting incident can happen on the last page, as far as I'm concerned. The midpoint can happen in the first 35%, as far as I'm concerned. If you can't keep people's interest in between the plot points, and I think that's the hard part, because I feel like when you think about 3-act structure, or you think about Freytag's, is it Freytag's Pyramid? I think it's Freytag's Pyramid, or the hero's journey, right? You're writing to major plot points, and I find that sometimes like my interest can dip between plot points, and I was like, well, be interesting between plot points. But if that's the conversation, then just be interesting. Again, with No Gods, No Monsters, and then I'm going to stop talking about this man. I know his ears are burning. He's in Indiana. He's not even far from here. What I loved about that, one of the things I loved about that book, and something that I recognized and that I talked to him about, and he affirmed it, is that like it's a multiple protagonist story, and because there are so many points of view, like really, I was like, how did you make sure that everyone had an arc and made it make sense? And like his response was, rather than following the characters, I'm following the events that are happening in the world. And people are living up through these events, reacting to these events, spiraling from these events, living their lives, and then building up to the next event. And so it's not a conversation about one main character's arc. We're watching their arc. We're watching people live lives. Because I think sometimes people forget the characters are people. And like if you can keep the characters interesting, if you keep people interested between the things, then like you don't have to. What's the plot point?
Yeah. One of the things you said there about rhythm too reminded me again of poetry and how or sorry, I'm making it about poetry and about rhythm, but the keeping it interesting is also to me related to how poetry, like poets will invent forms, and if they're like creating a form that you can then follow the rhythm of, it works because they've made a rhythm that draws people in. And I feel like it's a similar thing to what you're saying, that you don't have to follow conventional structure if it's pulling people along. And now, Sameem.
I was just going to +1 all of that and then throw out another recommendation, which was Under the Eye of the Big Bird that I read recently by Hiromi Kamakawi, that I think was similar to No Gods, No Monsters in some ways, in that it's telling like lots of different stories, but there's some key events, lots of different stories, lots of different POVs, even lots of different like time periods, but there's key events that are tying all these things together. And there in the world, there was probably an inciting incident, but that's not like, it's not a critical plot point even to like, and it's not like, hey, we got to tell people at the 25% mark. Like you just kind of know that there was an inciting incident, and the story just remains interesting inherently because of the characters and the words in the world.
Hmm. One,
I want to say that there are a lot of ways to create rhythm, and I think most people play to whatever they're writing. Everyone has a writing superpower, maybe 2 or 3, right? And so this thing that they do very well, they never have to worry about it. In fact, it's the thing that like they probably lean on the most, and they should probably figure out what their writing like kryptonites are, and go out and like forward up those skills so that they're at the same level as their superpower, right? So we're all just like really well-rounded writers. And I think I think we all have something that we can do that comes easily to us, that can help us create the feeling of rhythm, whether that is a poetic or a lyrical approach to prose, whether that is like pithy dialogue, whether that's pithy narration, or really like deep atmosphere, or playing really great with tone or mood. Like we all have things that we can do to like keep it. I'm in a novel writing class right now, and this guy does really great action scenes, and like there's no need for exposition because it happens in the scene. And like I'm taking his work apart because I'm just like, bro, if I was writing action scenes like this, I'd have friends.
Shingai.
I feel like that connects to something that we were talking about earlier with like where you end the story with a novella and how it can end at the beginning point of something or even in the midpoint of something. But like your superpower or the rhythm that you choose. Now I'm thinking about it in terms of music and dancing, right? Like if it's a good song and I find that beat, like we can go. We can go as long, like take me DJ, let's go. Where are we going? I will follow you. I will follow you. But then if like the transition is weird, then suddenly I'm like, what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, hold up. Hold up, what's going on? And then also the song can't just like end in the middle of like a beat, you know, like it has to, if it's carrying me somewhere, I need to go with it where it's going. So in that sense too, whatever your superpower is with rhythm and when it comes to writing, I feel like that's what you need to follow to get to the end. And the other things, even if they end in the middle, if you've caught me with that bass, with that like drum beat, I'm gonna follow you.
Yes,
Yeah.
because look, the other things you can add on artificially afterward.
Mm-hmm.
You can write a draft,
Yeah.
read a book on description, go back and apply that to your draft while fixing the other stuff that you wanted to fix in your draft, and then on the next round of edits, like smooth shit out. But you need. I, we've been using rhythm. I usually call it third rail. It's that thing that after you finish a draft makes you go back and be like, okay, this actually isn't bad. Like it's the thing that you're like, oh, you know, I think I do like this thing that like, it's the thing that when you read it again, you're like, I'm not going to throw this away.
So, speaking of following people to the end, this is a bad transition to try to get to Shingai and how you managed to take your novella to publication, because that's something that we haven't really gotten to talk about. Like, what was the process of publishing a novella like for you? Is it a different process? I guess for those, like, it sounds, you came out of short fiction. So I guess what was the move like from publishing short fiction to publishing a novella?
Yeah. I will preface this by saying that I feel like getting novellas published is different for every author. And like there's so many different ways to get a novella published right now. And I feel really lucky because the way that I feel like I stumbled into getting my story published. The short story version of And This Is How to Stay Alive was also the first short story that I got paid for and paid pro rates. So it happened very quickly because that story had been rejected by a bunch of different places. So when I wrote the novella, I was like, I don't even know what to do with this length. And I feel like it's lpkindred who may have put me onto Neon Hemlock. Because he just be putting me onto everything, honestly. And he was like, they publish queer speculative novellas Dave is wonderful. Already LP, of course, was on first name basis with him, as he is with everyone. And I was like, I'm gonna submit this and see what happens. And at this point, I had revised the novella maybe one time. And that had been with my MFA professors, and like I had workshopped it in class and stuff like that. So I sent it to Dave, and I got a revise and resubmit. So I didn't get an automatic yes. And there were some things about the first version of the novella that he received that were just like, this is how this might come across in this moment, especially because like it's dealing with the decision to commit suicide. And yeah, there's just a lot of homophobia and just like a lot of really big things that need to be handled with a lot of care. And one of the things that I appreciated about working with Dave, which I will say, if I have any advice, if you can get a small independent publisher who cares. I don't know if everyone will be as lucky as I was, but like Dave cares very deeply about the world, about the work. And it was very easy to work on edits and getting it to publication ready with him because there was just a lot of consideration in the process, which I have heard that sometimes people get overlooked with big publishers because they're just handling so much all the time that they don't have the time to give you the attention that your work may require or desire. Especially if it's a first book, which mine was. That was my first book. And to have such a beautiful experience, I feel like it makes it hard for those who are coming after Dave when it comes to publishing me.
So everybody send your novellas to Neon Hemlock.
Absolutely. That's the moral of the story. In fact, I think they're open for novellas.
It's soon, really soon. Right? Today? No. Soon?
We'll find out.
By the time this episode goes live, it's likely that Neon Hemlock is open for novellas. Y'all, I think we might have run to the end of my questions about novellas. Do any of you have closing? Sameem does. Sameem has closing thoughts.
This wasn't a closing thought. It's another question, which we don't have time for. I will save it for...
We do have time. We have 5 minutes of time.
Let me try to formulate this into a question. I guess I'm curious... For those who are working on novellas or have worked on novellas, how often, or if you just know from the industry, how often is this like, is the choice to do a novella or a novel or a short story or a novelette like as much of a publishing economic question versus like an art and form question?
Sorry, I was reading the comments. Could you ask that question?
Yeah, one more time. I was reading the comments too.
I understood the question.
Okay, LP, can you restate the question?
Yeah, like the decision to work on a novella versus a novel, or I guess short fiction could qualify as well. Like, is it a commercial concern that makes you write a novella, or is it an artistic concern that makes you not write a novella? I statements for me. It's a practice concern. I think I talked about this a few weeks ago. Like my goal is mastery, essentially. Like I want to be able to write well at every length, in every format eventually. Like that's the goal. And so like, I'm going to write novellas so that I can be like, hey, I now know how to write novellas. I'm going to write novels and I'll be like, hey, now I know how to write novels. Maybe I'll write a screenplay because you know, I don't know how to do that yet, but like I want I want for someone to come to me and say, hey, can you write this? And me have no trepidation about anything. Yes, I can.
Look, take this with a grain of salt because I have not actually written one of these. However, writing a novella feels approachable to me in a way that writing a novel does not. And that I just shut down when I try to get myself to think about doing that. but it feels like something that I could do. And so I think that it feels like something. I don't think that that's an artistic concern or a market concern. It's like Jenna's anxiety could work with this form. So maybe that is artistic. I
think
know.
that's artistic to me.
Yeah, I think that's practice or process. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Look, I think the commercial and artistic. I think artistic is a big silo. I think that a lot of different things go into that, and some of it is like, I have this story and it's this length. I need to submit it somewhere that takes things at this length. But I think there's also like, if you're aiming at a novella and you hit a novella, it was like, look, I did a thing. Or if you're doing a bunch of them, because apparently novellas are habit forming. Like apparently, like if you write 1 or 2 novellas, like the next few things that come out of you are going to be novellas, and you have to like reteach yourself how to write in other lengths. Like you kind of get the rhythm of them.
Public service announcement. We have to put a warning on this episode because you may become addicted to writing novellas.
Novellas are habit forming.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.